All right, everybody, here we are back with Chris at Truly Tropical, and there's a whole bunch of trees on the ground. And
just parts of trees.
Parts of trees, and no, we didn't have a hurricane, but what happened, Chris, to these trees?
Well, this large tree at the end is a kit. It has a lot of mangoes on it, and everything else in this row is pretty much out of mangoes. And so when you pick the last mango from a tree, that's the best time to start trimming. So this is all stuff from these trees. We've been trying to trim them back whenever they're out of fruit. Of course, we're pretty tired this time of year from picking all the fruit and hauling that around. So there are more trees that need to be trimmed than we have already trimmed, but we are trying our best to get as many done every week as possible. And you know, one thing that we like to do is keep the trees fairly small, and that requires trimming. So this time of year we do some major cuts on the trees, and often we'll come back in the fall or late summer and do a little light trimming on the trees again. But definitely, if you want your trees like manageable, fruit easy to pick next season, now is the time to trim your trees. And
when you say you like to keep them small, what's small? And do you go by per tree, the location, or just you all keep them all the same size?
Well, unfortunately, most of the trees are larger than what I would want them to be. It's just that you have to stay on top of it every year, and there were 4 or 5 years that I didn't get as much trimming done as I wanted to. So we are just dealing with a lot of big root systems. But basically each tree has its own growth habit, and it's nice if you can get a tree that doesn't want to be huge, but for any size tree you can keep it certainly at 12 feet or about that. And some of these trees are shorter than 12 feet too. So you just sort of have to work with the growth habit. This particular tree has a more upright growth habit than this one next to it, has more branching and sort of makes a nicer looking tree without much intervention. So just try to cluster your trees according to their projected height, and then it's easier to keep them all sort of similar. Right here we have Gary, this tree that hasn't yet quite been trimmed. It has a few fruit on it, like you might be able to see there's 3 hanging at the top of the tree. And so there's just a few fruit that are holding back the trimming of that particular
So with
tree.
3 fruits, you wouldn't touch this tree just for those 3 fruits?
Yeah, it's if I see them, I try to leave
so
them
literally
out.
The last one.
Yeah, it's one of those things, every fruit.
Now when you say you try to keep them at 12 feet, let's say, or 10 feet, does that mean you're going to, because they're going to grow once you cut them, so if you want to keep a tree at 12 feet, when you cut it, do you cut it to 10 and let it grow to 12, or do you cut it to 12 and it'll just grow that season more?
Well, most of the energy of the tree is it goes to the most vertical central branch of the tree. And so, it's a thing called apical dominance. And so the lateral branches don't get as much energy if that central trunk or whatever is growing. And so if you take that particular branch down, then it opens up the inside of the tree for sunlight and air circulation, and also sends more energy to all the other branches. And so that's one of the things that we do is if one branch is dominating the tree, we try and cut it way back this time of year, because that's the tree will have plenty of time to recover before flowering season. So that's 6 months away.
Now looking at the floor here, you've significantly cut back these trees, and these are big branches with many shoots. So this is 3 shoots and then 3 there. And looking at this tree here, so what stopped you from cutting that off? What determines where you're going to cut and not cut?
Well, it's sort of what I feel like. It's sort of a whim. But the thing about this particular branch is that it fruits at a different time than the rest of the tree. And so I sort of like that. And so I kept this branch. It's not terribly tall. It tends to sort of bend over a little bit. And the rest of the tree I cut way back so that the rest of the tree should fruit also, but this branch is going to fruit first. Chances are that will be.
It's not a different variety. It's the same variety.
Same variety. Yes.
Wow, wow. And I see another tree next to it. How close are those two trees right there?
Oh, pretty darn close. I would say that's about 10 feet.
So even 10 feet, this tree, for somebody's own personal use, is as big as somebody would need it, right? In their own personal yard?
Yeah, it depends on how hungry you are.
Yeah, but so 10 feet is okay if you're going to keep the trees trimmed, do you think?
Oh, yeah. There are people that, of course, use, like 6 meter, or not 6 meters, 8-foot distance between 2 meters, I guess it is, between trees. But you have to keep those trees very small in order to make sure that the tree gets sunlight and everything. But you can put a whole lot of trees in a small space. Great.
Now I have another question here as we're looking at this branch. So this piece here, I've been wanting to ask you, this piece here, when it grew 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you let it go about 2 hand lengths, and then I see it's 1, 2, and 3, and the same thing in this branch. You got about 2 hand lengths and then 1, 2, and 3. Same thing here. Did you purposely do it this way? Like this one went a little bit longer. But when you prune the trees, do you purposely do that, or do you just let the tree does what it's going to do?
This is what it does on its own, and it's actually a perfect example of that apical dominance thing I was just talking about. Because this, let's see if we have, this branching here is what it does on its own. So there are 5 different shoots coming out of this same place. Not all 5 will always live, but one of them will become dominant. And so this right here used to look like this before this whole branch grew. I mean, it's got probably a year and a half or 2 years of growth on that. So what happened is this one, so for example, this particular shoot is more dominant. It's much thicker than all these others. So it's not necessarily the middle one that's going to be dominant. This one's not the middle one that is dominant. Is that correct? But look, this is, when it was on the tree, this is the one that's most vertical.
I see.
And so even though we have these branches out, this is getting
But this one was in the middle more.
Right, yeah, that's sort of more in the middle. But this one was more vertical, gets more energy from the tree, and so these are going to be wimpy in the long term. They're not going to grow very much.
So as you see this growing, when you saw this, would it have been a good idea to prune this one earlier, or not necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, actually what in a perfect world, when I didn't have hundreds of trees to trim and keep an eye on, what the best thing to do is to trim it below this area where everything is going the same, all of this is branching on its own from the same place. And you cut below that, and if you, for instance, cut right here, like a 1/4 inch above the top of this leaf, maybe a little bit more, there's a leaf bud there, or a branch bud right there, and it will start growing from that, and probably the next 3 or 4 leaves would determine where the branches are coming out. And so that is a much stronger structure, because you don't have this tons of branching coming out of the same place. And so, you can choose where your branches come from if you cut the tips off.
Well, I've heard that by a lot of people, but some other people say this is a good idea because it gives you more branches, and if you don't let them go too long, they won't be too strong, and then you can get more mangoes. Now you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as opposed if you cut that and you just have 1 or 2.
Well, I don't agree.
Okay, like look at this here. And I know this happened because you didn't have the time to cut it. So you're saying if you would have been pruning this and you had the time, you would have pruned it here under the ball?
Well, in an ideal world, and of course you have to realize that this was 10 or 12 feet in the air. So
Yeah, but in an ideal world,
yeah.
you said this
so
would...
what in an ideal world, trimming would be like every 10 to 12 inches. So, you know, like here we have some branching. These little smaller branches are not going to live in the long term. So, but if you go, this is where you've got a lot of buds clustered. You don't want to cut right above that, but if you cut below that, you can see the leaf scars. And above that, each one of those is a bud. And you could cut, for instance, you know, like right here, and you would get a branch here, possibly a branch there. There's one in the back, one here. So you would get the same number of branches as from up, you know, what the tree would do normally, but you would have them coming out in different places, on a different plane. And that actually makes a much stronger structure because there's, you know, as the branch grows, it makes like a collar around the branch that it's coming off of. And if you have those on different parts of this particular branch, then if, for instance, we had a hurricane, it would be much stronger.
So you're saying like right here, ideally this would be the best place to cut it, like around here? Yeah,
this is a sort of a different situation because this is rather short, 6 inches or so, and it's sort of, this seems pretty wimpy, probably because so much energy is going above it. But ideally, you go out like 10 inches. For instance, here, if you left the bottom 3 leaves on here and cut, I usually try and cut at an angle just because it sheds water better.
Okay.
And then you would get a branch here, here, and here. You know, if for some reason that didn't work out, there are other leaf buds lower that would eventually make branches.
So basically this, if you can avoid it and cut like lower than this, that'd be ideal.
Right,
saying.
yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad we covered that. Now, as for your trees, these haven't been pruned yet, but this one's been pruned. You left that one on a little bit taller because it fruits first.
Right, so yeah, we got 3 here. We've got a lot of them on the other side, the next row over. There's big piles of branches near the driveway. Basically, we do a lot of trimming for usually about 3 or 4 weeks, and then we call in somebody who has a chipper, chips it all up, so it doesn't go to the landfill or anything like that. It just goes back to feeding the soil that the trees are growing in. Great.
Now I was going to ask you another question. So if somebody had a small yard, and could they use some of this as budwood, some of these as budwood, or no?
Well, of course it's good to get it before it's cut.
Yeah.
But if you harvest the scions when there's active buds showing, like for instance, this one has sprouted out. That's too young. You would cut that off. But you see here we have 2 buds that are nice, big and fat. And if you had something that was big enough to use this scion on, you could cut this off and cut the leaves off. Cut this off because it's just a waste at this age.
Sure.
And then you could use that to graft onto another
so
plant.
some of this, for people that have their own yard, when they're right before they do their trimming, they could get budwood if they wanted to.
Yeah. There's I happen to have made a video on preparing scions, and so that could be helpful. But there's basically 2 ways. You can look for an instance like this where there's already buds forming and use that, or else you can encourage the plant to produce those buds, and then you get a really nice product. It increases your success rate quite a bit.
Okay, all right. How long before would you do something like that?
It really depends on the time of year. Let me see if there's something on. This is Gary here, and see if we can. Well, here's one that I didn't come back to look at in time, but I took off these leaves here, and then the buds up on top of the scion started you know, like leafing out. And
Okay.
so, you know, I can.
So once they started, then you could have cut them at the time.
When they were, you know, when they were swollen buds, before they were in this stage. But if that happens, you can always just take those off, and then buds will form in other places for that particular thing. But yeah,
wonderful.
It can take anywhere. Sometimes it's as quick as a week. But I've been hesitating to offer scions, you know, over the summer, not only because I'm really busy with the mangoes, but also it has been taking, you know, sometimes more than a month before the scions look like they're at a good stage for grafting. And so, you know, increase it. It's good to have a good quality product before you actually graft.
Sure. Now another thing I noticed on your trees here, they split at a low end. Is that by design by you, or is that just the way they were when you got here?
No branching, you mean?
Yes.
No, I mean, we planted all of the mango trees except for the really old
So
ones.
did you purposely let them branch out at the bottom there?
It's nice to have low branching because of getting reachable fruit. So yeah, a lot of our trees have the very low branching, but it wasn't something that we intentionally tried to do. It's just happened and we didn't discourage it.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you for sharing this tip, and it's a lot of work, but it pays off because every year you have tons of fruit. And you took off, it looks like a lot of that tree. Somebody told me you shouldn't cut back more than 1/3 of the tree because then it can affect production next year. Is that a general rule or not necessarily?
You know, it's better to do major pruning as soon as possible because the summer is a wonderful time for the plants to recover. You know, we've left enough of the branches, you know, the fairly old branches on the tree, so I don't think it will affect production next year, but time will tell.
Yes, well, thank you for sharing this with us, everybody. This is Truly Tropical. The contact information is below the video. Thank you, Chris, for joining us. And if anyone wants to get mangoes right now that are in season, she has a ton of mangoes. You can see on the website the selection, and then also they sell trees here as well. So, Chris, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.